If there is one dangerous illusion people carried into the Second World War, it was the belief that modern civilization itself offered protection. In 1939, millions of civilians across Europe and Asia believed war was something that happened to armies, borders, and politicians, not to kitchens, stairwells, churches, or tram stops. That belief killed people. Early in the Second World War, civilians did not die only because of bombs or bullets. They died because they trusted habits that no longer worked, authorities who were unprepared, and assumptions inherited from a peaceful age. This episode on Iron Age instincts is about those mistakes, not to judge the past, but to extract lessons that still matter whenever societies face sudden collapse. The first deadly mistake civilians made was assuming the war would be short, limited, or negotiated away. In Poland, France, and later the Soviet Union, civilians delayed evacuations because newspapers promised quick victories or diplomatic resolutions. Families stayed in cities marked on military maps because they believed governments would protect them or that the front lines would stabilize elsewhere. In reality, early Second World War warfare was defined by speed. Mechanized units and air power collapsed defensive lines in days, not months. Civilians who waited for official evacuation orders often found roads cut, railways bombed, and fuel confiscated. The practical lesson here is brutally simple. When reliable indicators show rapid escalation, delay becomes a form of risk-taking. Those who survived often acted on partial information, leaving early with little more than essentials, understanding that mobility itself was survival. Another fatal error was misunderstanding air power and refusing to adapt daily routines. Early bombings shattered pre-war assumptions about cities being safe at night or during working hours. In Warsaw, Rotterdam and London, civilians clustered in familiar public spaces during air raids, believing stone buildings, churches or underground stations automatically meant safety. Some of those assumptions were catastrophically wrong. Heavy masonry collapsed inward during high explosive blasts. Poorly ventilated shelters filled with smoke or toxic gases. In contrast, civilians who learned quickly survived by changing behavior rather than infrastructure. They avoided predictable gathering spots, learned blast patterns, reinforced basements properly, and respected blackout discipline. Applied practically, this teaches that survival under new threats depends less on comfort and more on rapid behavioral adaptation. When threat dynamics change, routines must change faster. Civilians also paid heavily for trusting that neutrality, compliance, or invisibility would protect them. In occupied territories, many believed that avoiding politics or cooperating quietly would keep them safe. Early occupation policies exploited this mindset. Registrations, ration cards, and identity papers were introduced under the promise of order. Those who complied without contingency plans made themselves legible to regimes that soon weaponized bureaucracy. Jewish families in Germany and Poland, political dissidents in occupied Europe, and civilians labelled undesirable learned too late that administrative systems could become tools of extermination. Survivors often resisted not through open rebellion, but through subtle non-compliance, false papers, fractured identities, and decentralized family movements. The modern application is understanding that systems demanding total visibility are not neutral by default. Maintaining options, redundancy, and the ability to disappear can be life-saving under authoritarian pressure. Another overlooked mistake was underestimating scarcity and overestimating supply chains. Early in the war, civilians continued pre-war consumption patterns, assuming markets would adjust. In besieged cities like Leningrad, this illusion lasted only weeks before catastrophic hunger set in. Families who failed to store food, learn preservation, or reduce dependence on centralized distribution suffered the most. Those who survived learned quickly to diversify calorie sources, barter skills instead of currency, and reduce metabolic needs through activity management. Practically, this translates into understanding that food security is not about stockpiling luxury, but about resilience. Knowing how to preserve staples, cook with minimal fuel, and substitute ingredients mattered more than wealth. Civilians also made fatal social mistakes by isolating themselves. Fear, suspicion, and propaganda fractured communities early in the war. Individuals who tried to survive alone were more vulnerable to raids, denunciations, and resource shortages. In contrast, informal networks saved lives. Shared information about patrol patterns, pooled food supplies, and collective childcare allowed families to survive prolonged stress. Resistance did not always look like sabotage. Often it looked like cooperation. Applied today, this reinforces that social capital is survival capital. Skills, trust, and mutual obligation outperform individual preparedness when systems collapse. One of the most tragic errors was clinging to normalcy for psychological comfort. Many civilians continued sending children to school, attending public events, or maintaining rigid schedules long after conditions had deteriorated. This was not ignorance, but denial, a deeply human response. Yet war punished predictability. Those who broke routine survived ambushes, avoided raids, and adapted faster. Practically, this teaches that flexibility is not paranoia. It is an adaptive mindset. When patterns become liabilities, survival favors those willing to live irregularly. Early World War II also exposed the danger of outsourcing judgment entirely to authorities. Governments censored information, downplayed losses, and delayed warnings to maintain morale. Civilians who relied solely on official channels often received truth too late. Survivors cross-checked rumours, observed physical signs like troop movements or ration changes, and trusted local knowledge. Applied practically, this means cultivating independent situational awareness. Signals matter. Silence can be a warning. Sudden policy changes often precede disaster. The final mistake was failing to teach the next generation quickly. Children who were not trained in blackout discipline, evacuation protocols, or situational awareness became liabilities in crises. Families that involved children in preparation, explained risks honestly, and practiced drills increased survival odds. The lesson is clear. Knowledge delayed is often knowledge denied. The civilians who survived early World War II were not braver, stronger, or luckier by default. They were faster to abandon comforting assumptions and quicker to adapt their instincts to a new reality. That is the core lesson Iron Age instincts exists to explore. If this deep dive sharpened how you think about survival, history, and human behaviour under pressure, subscribe to the channel, share this episode with fellow serious historians, and keep these lessons alive. History only becomes useful when we apply it.